My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 26 years old, and the night everything changed still feels like it happened yesterday. It was late, the house was quiet, and I was about to go upstairs when I heard my mother's voice, sharp and cold, drift through the hallway. She wasn't talking about bills or chores. She was whispering to my sister about me, plotting to make me pay. In that one moment, the home I thought I knew shattered, and I realized I was no longer safe under its roof. White right pointing backhand index. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. It was a Tuesday evening in early November, the kind of night where the air outside was cold enough to sting your cheeks, but inside, the old furnace rumbled and filled the house with a low, steady hum. Our family's two-story house on Elm Street had always been a place that felt ordinary: creaky floors, chipped paint on the banister, and the faint smell of cinnamon from my mom's scented candles. Nothing about it suggested secrets, at least not the kind that could change everything. Yet, that night, the house seemed different, like the walls themselves were waiting to tell me something I wasn't supposed to hear. I remember I had been in the kitchen, rinsing out my coffee mug after a long shift at the bookstore. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet where even the ticking clock above the microwave sounded unnervingly loud. I thought everyone had gone to bed, but as I wiped my hands on a towel and started toward the stairs, I heard voices, low, hushed, and coming from the living room. I froze at the bottom of the staircase, my hand still gripping the railing. It was my mother's voice, unmistakable, sharp in a way that made my stomach twist. "Relax," she whispered, though her tone carried more steel than comfort. "We'll make your brother pay." The words sliced through the silence like glass shattering on tile. For a second, I thought I had misheard her, that my tired mind was playing tricks on me. But then came my sister's voice, Rachel's voice, softer, but laced with something bitter. "Are you sure? He always has a way of slipping out of things," Rachel said. "No," my mother replied firmly. "This time, we'll make sure he pays for what he's done." My breath caught in my throat. My brother? They were talking about me. They weren't supposed to call me that anymore, not after years of being dismissed, undermined, and cast aside. They used your brother like I was a burden, like I wasn't their daughter at all but some problem they had to solve. Hearing those words, spoken so casually, so coldly, sent a chill up my spine. I pressed myself against the wall, the wood cool against my back, trying to steady my breathing so they wouldn't know I was there. The living room light spilled faintly into the hallway, flickering shadows across the floor. I could see the edge of the couch, my mother's slippered foot tapping anxiously, Rachel curled against the armrest, chewing on her fingernail like she always did when nervous. My heart pounded in my chest, so loud I swore they could hear it. I should have walked upstairs. I should have pretended I hadn't heard. But something anchored me there, rooted to the spot, listening against my better judgment. "Don't worry," Mom continued. "He won't see it coming. People like him never do." The words twisted in my stomach. People like him. What did that even mean? Was I not even family to her anymore? I wanted to step into the room, demand answers, force them to look me in the eye. But instead, I stood there in the shadows, my hands trembling, my nails digging into my palms. That's when the memories started coming back, uninvited but sharp. Little things I had ignored over the years suddenly made sense. The way Mom always sided with Rachel when we fought. The way Dad, before he left, warned me once, quietly, "Watch your back in this house." I thought he had meant it metaphorically, just another one of his bitter sayings before he packed his bags. But now, his words replayed in my head with a new, unsettling weight. I remembered last Christmas, when Mom accidentally forgot to get me a gift, though she had piles for Rachel. The way Rachel laughed when I asked about it, muttering, "Guess you don't matter that much." I remembered the time my bank card went missing, and Rachel swore she hadn't seen it. Weeks later, I found it shoved in the pocket of her winter coat. Mom dismissed it as a mix-up, telling me not to make a big deal out of nothing. But this wasn't nothing. This was deliberate. planned. As I stood there, trying to piece together their words, Rachel lowered her voice even more. But I caught fragments. Something about money. Something about taking control. Something about me not deserving what I had. I felt sick. The walls seemed to close in, the warm air of the house suddenly suffocating. I stumbled backward, careful not to make the floor creak, my throat burning with the urge to scream. I couldn't stand there any longer. I couldn't listen to the people who were supposed to protect me plotting against me like I was a stranger. I slipped into the hallway, my footsteps light, my breathing shallow. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. I made it to my room and closed the door silently, pressing my back against it as if I could shut out their voices. My room had always been my sanctuary, cluttered with old books, mismatched blankets, and the faint smell of vanilla from a candle on my nightstand. But that night, it felt like a cage. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hand shaking as I pulled out my phone. I stared at the screen, the glow illuminating my pale face in the dark. My savings account number flashed in my mind. Every dollar I had scraped together working long hours, every late night spent shelving books or babysitting neighbors' kids, every dream I had of someday moving out and starting fresh, it was all sitting there, vulnerable, just waiting to be taken. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I grabbed my laptop, the old one with the cracked corner, and opened it with trembling fingers. My chest tightened as I logged into my bank account, the familiar password typed in with mechanical precision. My balance appeared on the screen, modest, but mine. Mine. The only thing they couldn't take from me unless I let them. As my cursor hovered over the transfer button, doubt clawed at me. What if I was overreacting? What if I had misheard? What if Mom and Rachel were just venting, speaking in metaphors, exaggerating like they always did? But then I remembered the sharpness in Mom's voice, the bitterness in Rachel's tone, and I knew this wasn't just idle talk. This was real. I transferred every cent into a new account I had set up months earlier, just in case. I hadn't even known why I made it then. Maybe instinct, maybe survival. But now, as I watched the numbers shift on the screen, relief washed over me. They couldn't touch this. Not anymore. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the muffled sound of the TV downstairs. I imagined their faces if they knew what I had done, their shock, their anger. A twisted part of me felt satisfaction, like I had just taken back a piece of myself they had tried to steal for years. But underneath that flicker of triumph was fear. Because now, things would never be the same. They would find out eventually, and when they did, there would be no going back. That night, lying awake in the silence of my room, I stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of everything settle on my chest. My family, the people who raised me, who should have loved me, were plotting against me. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't safe in my own home. By morning, one thing was clear. I couldn't trust them. Not anymore. The pale November sun pushed its way through the blinds, painting my room in thin stripes of light, but it didn't warm me. Nothing about that morning felt ordinary. The air was thick with the weight of what I had overheard, the silence pressing in on me like walls that knew my secret. I moved slowly, every action deliberate, folding the blanket, pulling on my sweater, brushing my hair into a loose knot. Each movement felt like a performance, like I had to pretend nothing had changed, even though everything had. The hallway outside my room smelled faintly of burnt toast, a scent that had clung to the walls for years thanks to Mom's habit of always leaving bread in the toaster too long. The sound of dishes clinking drifted up from the kitchen. I paused at the top of the staircase, staring down into the space that had never really felt like mine. Our house was old, but not in the charming, storybook way. The carpets were worn thin in the middle, showing patches of wood beneath. The wallpaper in the hallway peeled at the corners, curling like dried leaves. Even the family photos on the wall felt staged, everyone smiling but their eyes telling a different story. In every picture, I was there, but always a step to the side, always a little apart, as if the camera knew I didn't belong. I descended the stairs slowly, the wood groaning under my weight. Mom stood at the counter, her back to me, spreading butter on toast with quick, sharp movements. Rachel sat at the table, scrolling on her phone, her hair still messy from sleep. For a moment, neither of them looked up. It gave me time to study them, to wonder how people who look so ordinary on the outside could hide such coldness underneath. "Morning," I said finally, forcing my voice into something light. Rachel glanced up, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she didn't answer. Mom turned her head halfway, offering a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, as if the night before had never happened. I slid into a chair, my stomach tight. The toast popped up, and Mom placed a slice on a plate in front of me, the butter already melting into the cracks. "Eat before it gets cold," she instructed. I stared at the bread but didn't touch it. The smell of burnt edges made me queasy. I watched Rachel instead. She kept her eyes on her phone, tapping at the screen with a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She didn't say anything, but I could feel the weight of her silence pressing against me. "Plans today?" Mom asked, pouring herself coffee. I hesitated. I hadn't decided yet. Part of me wanted to leave, to escape the house altogether, but another part of me needed to watch them closely, to understand just how far their plan went. "Work later," I lied. My shift wasn't until the weekend, but I didn't want them to know I'd be home. "That's good," Mom said, sipping her coffee. "Staying busy keeps the mind from wandering." The comment felt loaded, but I didn't bite. I only nodded, pushing the toast away gently. My appetite was gone. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. Rachel disappeared into her room, the door slamming shut. Mom moved through the house with her usual efficiency, vacuuming, sorting laundry, humming under her breath. From the outside, it looked normal. But underneath, every sound, every glance, felt charged with something darker. I wandered through the house, trailing my fingers along the walls. This was supposed to be home, but every corner carried memories that proved otherwise. The living room, with its sagging couch and crooked bookshelf, reminded me of the countless nights I sat there alone while Rachel went to parties and Mom watched TV in her bedroom. The kitchen, always smelling faintly of bleach and burnt food, held memories of me being scolded for not cooking right, while Rachel was excused from chores. Even my bedroom, cluttered with books and blankets, felt temporary, like a borrowed space I could never truly make my own. I paused at the front door, my hand hovering over the knob. The cold draft slipping through the cracks tempted me. I could leave, walk until the house was just a speck behind me. But where would I go? Every option seemed fragile, unsafe. So instead, I turned back and found myself standing at the foot of the staircase, staring up at the closed doors. Dad's old office was still there, untouched since he left years ago. I hadn't stepped inside since the night he walked out, his face tight with anger, his suitcase bumping against the stairs as Mom shouted after him. But now, something pulled me toward it. The door creaked open, and the smell of dust and old paper filled my nose. His desk sat in the corner, papers still scattered as if he had planned to return. The window overlooked the backyard, where the oak tree stretched its bare branches against the gray sky. I walked slowly across the room, my fingers brushing over the desk. A framed photo sat there, me at age 10, holding up a science fair ribbon, my smile wide. It was one of the few times Dad had come to see me, and he had snapped the picture himself. I hadn't realized he'd kept it. I sank into his old chair, the leather cracked and worn. For a moment, I felt like a child again, small and searching for safety. This room was the only part of the house that didn't feel hostile, as though Dad's presence lingered, shielding me from the rest of them. But the peace didn't last. Rachel's laughter echoed from her room, sharp and mocking, breaking the quiet. I clenched my fists, the sound pulling me back to reality. She was still here, still plotting, still waiting for me to stumble. By afternoon, the house felt unbearable. I slipped on my jacket and stepped outside, the cold air biting my skin. The street was empty, leaves skittering across the pavement. I walked with no destination, my thoughts tangled. Every house I passed seemed warmer, safer, more welcoming than mine. Curtains drawn back, children's toys in the yard, wreaths on doors. They weren't perfect, I knew, but compared to mine, they were everything I wanted. I ended up at the park a few blocks away, sitting on a bench with my hands shoved deep in my pockets. The sky had turned a muted silver, clouds gathering. I watched families walk by, parents holding their children's hands, couples sharing coffee, laughter spilling into the crisp air. A lump rose in my throat. I had never had that. Not really. The wind picked up, tugging at my hair. I thought about Dad again, about how he used to take me to the same park when I was little. We'd feed the ducks, and he'd tell me stories about faraway places. For a while, I had believed him when he said, "One day, it'll just be us, and we'll be free." But he had left, and freedom never came. By the time I returned home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the porch. The lights inside glowed faintly, but the warmth didn't reach me. As I pushed open the door, Rachel's voice drifted from the living room. "She won't even see it coming." I froze. She was on the phone, her tone low but gloating. "Yeah, Mom's on board. It'll be easy. She's too naive to notice until it's too late." Her words tightened around my chest like a vice. I stepped quietly up the stairs before she could see me, my heart pounding with each step. My room felt smaller than ever, the walls pressing closer. I sat on my bed, staring at the floor. This house had never been a home. It had been a cage dressed in wallpaper and family photos, a place where love was conditional and safety an illusion. Every creak of the floors, every whisper behind closed doors, every memory etched into the walls reminded me I didn't belong. And now, it wasn't just that I didn't belong. It was that I wasn't wanted. As night fell, the house grew quiet again, but the silence no longer fooled me. Behind it lurked voices, plans, betrayals waiting to surface. I lay awake, listening, every nerve on edge. The roof creaked in the wind, footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway, and my heart refused to slow. In that restless dark, I realized something that chilled me deeper than the November air outside. I was still here, still trapped inside a house that had never felt like home, and if I stayed, it would destroy me piece by piece. The morning after the shouting match in the kitchen, the house felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I remember sitting at the small wooden table in the breakfast nook, staring at the faded yellow curtains swaying in the breeze, trying to convince myself it was just another day. But it wasn't. Something had shifted, and though I couldn't yet put my finger on it, I felt it in my chest like a weight pressing harder with every passing hour. I poured myself a cup of coffee and tried to focus on the bitter warmth, but then I noticed it, the quiet. Usually, by that time, the house would be humming with small noises, the creak of my mother moving between rooms, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, a door closing too quickly, or the faint static of the old television in the living room. But that morning, there was nothing. Just silence. When I finally got up and walked toward the living room, I caught the tail end of a whisper. My sister's voice, sharp but hushed, followed by my mother's lower tone. I froze just outside the doorway, holding my breath. "If she keeps asking questions, we'll have to push sooner," my sister said. My heart lurched. Push what? I leaned against the wall, my palms damp with sweat. "She won't," my mother replied, more certain. "She's always been too afraid to cause real trouble. She'll stay quiet." I stood there, stunned. It was me they were talking about, no doubt. The air in my lungs turned heavy, and for a moment I thought about barging into the room and demanding answers. But something deep inside told me to stay hidden, to keep listening. "She's not as weak as you think," my sister continued, her voice carrying a bitterness that stung. "She's been watching us. You saw how she reacted last night." "That was nothing," my mother dismissed. "Just nerves. She won't do anything. She never does." I pressed my back to the wall and fought to stay steady. My legs wanted to give out, but I forced myself to breathe silently. Their words felt like shards cutting into me, every sentence confirming a fear I'd carried for years, that they never truly saw me, only the version they wanted. But then my sister's next words made my skin crawl. Still, we should move the documents before she gets curious again. Dad's things should have been handled months ago. Documents. Dad. My father had passed years ago, and his things had always been a sensitive subject. I hadn't thought much about it lately, but now the pieces started to connect. They were hiding something tied to him. I slipped back to my room as quietly as I could, heart pounding in my ears. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I tried to steady myself, but my mind raced with questions. What documents? Why the urgency? And why did it sound like they were preparing for something? That night, I stayed awake, listening. Every creak of the floorboards made me sit up. I could hear them moving around long after midnight. Doors opening, footsteps down the hall, whispers floating through the walls. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough. Plotting, planning. The following day, I decided to test the waters. Over breakfast, I casually asked, "Hey, do you know what happened to Dad's old files? The ones he kept locked in that metal box?" The reaction was immediate. My sister froze, her spoon halfway to her mouth. My mother's eyes flicked up from her plate, sharp and assessing. "Why are you asking about that?" my mother said, too quickly. I shrugged, trying to mask my nerves. I just remembered it, that's all. Thought maybe I'd look through it. For memories. My sister scoffed, the sound cold. Memories? What good are old papers? You should leave the past alone. Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just annoyance, it was fear. She didn't want me near those papers, whatever they were. "I suppose you're right," I said softly, forcing a small smile, even though my chest ached. "It's just, sometimes I miss him." That was true, but it was also bait. My mother's eyes softened briefly, but then hardened again. "Don't go looking for trouble," she said, her voice final, like a door slamming shut. After that, I knew for certain they were hiding something. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. The atmosphere in the house grew tense, almost suffocating. I noticed little things, like how my sister started locking her bedroom door, or how my mother kept the study closed when she never used to care before. Even the way they spoke changed. Their conversations dropped to whispers the moment I entered a room. Then one afternoon, while they were both out, I finally worked up the courage to search. My hands shook as I stepped into the study, a room that had once been my father's sanctuary. The air smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I checked drawers, shelves, even behind books, but nothing stood out. My frustration grew until I spotted it, a small, uneven space beneath the rug near the desk. Kneeling down, I pulled the rug back and found a loose floorboard. My heart pounded as I pried it open. Inside was a faded envelope, edges yellowed with time. I pulled it out and unfolded the brittle paper inside. My father's handwriting leapt off the page, and my throat tightened. It was a letter, unfinished, dated just weeks before he passed. In it, he wrote about changing the will and ensuring that sight and things went where they truly belonged. He mentioned me by name. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to keep reading. The letter cut off abruptly, almost mid-thought, as if he hadn't gotten the chance to finish. My hands trembled as I put it back into the envelope, heart racing with a mix of grief and shock. My father had intended to leave something to me, something my mother and sister clearly didn't want me to know about. That evening, I tried to act normal, but every word they spoke felt like poison now. My sister's laugh sounded hollow, my mother's smile false. I couldn't look at them without wondering what else they'd kept from me. Later that night, I overheard them again, their voices sharp through the thin walls. "She's getting too close," my sister hissed. "She won't find it," my mother reassured, though there was a crack in her voice this time. "She already knows more than she should. If she stumbles on the rest, then we'll deal with it." My mother cut her off. My blood ran cold. Deal with it? Deal with me. I lay awake for hours, my mind replaying every word, every look, every shadow in that house. For the first time, I realized just how dangerous the situation had become. This wasn't just about old papers or family tension anymore. This was about survival. And as much as I wanted to believe otherwise, one thing became clear that night. Their plan was unfolding, and I was right in the middle of it. Lying in the dark that night, I stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of the old house pressing in on me. Every sound felt magnified. The distant tick of the clock, the creak of wood settling, the occasional rustle of wind slipping through the cracks in the window frame. But louder than all of it was the echo of my mother's voice. Then we'll deal with it. It replayed again and again, like a blade sharpening inside my mind. For the first time, I knew I couldn't afford to just listen anymore. If I didn't act, I'd be swallowed whole by whatever game they were playing. And if my father had truly meant for something to be mine, then I owed it to him, and to myself, to fight for it. The decision came quietly, almost calmly. I would no longer wait to see what they would do. From that moment forward, I would take the lead. The next morning, I moved differently. My body felt the same, but inside, something had shifted. I carried myself with a steadiness I hadn't known in years. At breakfast, I didn't avoid my mother's eyes. I looked straight into them, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker there. My sister noticed too. She gave me a long, narrowed glance, her lips tightening. "Sleep well?" my mother asked, the question laced with careful politeness. "Better than ever," I replied, forcing a small smile. It's strange how quiet the house has become lately, almost as if people are hiding something. My sister's spoon clattered against her bowl. She tried to cover it with a laugh, but the sound was too sharp, too forced. "You've been imagining things again." "Maybe," I said softly, keeping my tone light. "Or maybe I'm just noticing more than I used to." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on, and I savored it. For once, they didn't have the upper hand. After breakfast, I excused myself and went straight to my room, closing the door behind me. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled my laptop from beneath the bed. It was old and scratched, but it still worked well enough. I connected to the spotty Wi-Fi and opened a blank document. I started writing everything I'd overheard, everything I'd found, including the unfinished letter. Every detail, every whispered word. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was evidence. Proof. But I didn't stop there. I scanned the letter, took photos of the study, even the loose floorboard. I emailed copies to myself, storing them in a hidden folder. My father's voice, his intentions, his unfinished truth. They would not be erased, not this time. By afternoon, I decided to test them. In the living room, while pretending to read, I casually asked, "Do you ever think about what Dad would have wanted? I mean, if he'd been able to finish what he was working on before he passed." The effect was immediate. My mother stiffened. My sister slammed her magazine shut and glared at me. "What exactly do you mean?" she snapped. I met her gaze evenly. "I just wonder. People leave things undone all the time. Projects, letters, plans." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Sometimes, though, the truth finds its way out anyway. My sister's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but my mother cut her off with a tight, controlled voice. "Enough of this. The past is the past. Don't dig up what doesn't concern you." "But it does concern me," I said, the firmness in my tone surprising even myself. "It always has." My mother's eyes darkened, but for the first time, I wasn't the one who looked away. That night, when I was sure they were asleep, I slipped back into the study. The floorboard creaked softly as I pulled it open again, but this time, I wasn't just searching for scraps. I wanted the whole truth. I found more than I expected. Beneath the empty space where the envelope had been, there was another compartment, hidden deeper. Inside lay a small black notebook, its leather cover cracked with age. My father's handwriting sprawled across the first page, dated months before his passing. As I flipped through it, my breath caught. It wasn't just notes. It was a record. Transactions, meetings, conversations. He had been keeping track of everything, even mentioning my mother and sister directly. Words like pressure, disagreement, deception jumped out at me, each one a wound opening fresh. By the time I reached the last page, my hands were shaking. My father had suspected them. He had known something wasn't right, and he had been planning to act. Clutching the notebook to my chest, I realized this was my leverage, my proof. They thought they held all the cards, but now I had the ace. The next morning, I carried myself with quiet confidence. Over breakfast, I slid the notebook onto the table, the sound of it hitting the wood startling them both. "What's this?" my mother asked, her voice sharp. "Something Dad left behind," I said evenly. "Something that tells a very different story than the one you've been pushing." My sister reached for it, but I pulled it back. "No, you don't get to touch it. Not anymore." Her eyes blazed with fury, but she didn't move. My mother's face, however, was harder to read, somewhere between fear and calculation. "What do you want?" she finally asked, her tone clipped. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "I want the truth. All of it. And if you won't give it to me, then I'll make sure someone else hears it instead." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. For the first time in my life, they looked at me not as someone to control, but as someone to fear. Over the next few days, I played my role carefully. I didn't rush, didn't show all my cards. I dropped small hints, subtle reminders that I knew more than they thought. My sister grew restless, snapping at the smallest things. My mother tried to maintain her composure, but the cracks showed: late-night phone calls, hushed arguments behind closed doors. I watched, waited, gathered more. Every slip of the tongue, every suspicious movement. I logged it all. Piece by piece, their plan was unraveling, and they didn't even realize it was my hands pulling the threads. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house glowed in amber light, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes, when my sister stormed in. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she spat, her eyes wild. "Walking around like you're in control." I dried my hand slowly, turning to face her. "Maybe I am." Her face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this." I stepped closer, my voice a whisper but sharp as glass. "No, for once, you will." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. She didn't answer, just stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But the look on her face told me everything. I had finally shifted the balance. And as I stood there, the cool water dripping from my fingertips, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back. The tables had turned, and this time, they were the ones trapped in the shadows of their own making. They were the ones trapped in the shadows of their own making, yet I hadn't realized just how dark those shadows truly were until the night it all cracked open. It began quietly, almost innocently. The rain had come in steady sheets that evening, the sound tapping against the roof in a rhythm that felt almost calming. I sat at the kitchen table with the black notebook in front of me, pages spread wide like an open wound. The words glared up at me, my father's handwriting tight and urgent, every line screaming with the weight of things he hadn't been able to finish. That's when I heard it, soft footsteps outside the back door. Not the creak of the floorboards inside, not the ordinary settling of the house. No, this was deliberate, careful. My breath caught, and I snapped the notebook shut, sliding it beneath a folded newspaper. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The steps lingered, then the faint rattle of the doorknob followed. Someone was testing it. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me again, like it used to when I was younger, imagining monsters in the dark. But then came the scrape. Metal against metal. Someone was trying to force the lock. I stood slowly, my chair legs dragging softly against the tile, and slipped into the shadows by the pantry. The kitchen light still glowed, throwing my silhouette across the floor, but I pressed myself tight against the wall. The lock clicked. The door eased open, and there she was, my sister, drenched from the rain, hair plastered against her cheeks, eyes wide and frantic. In her hand, she clutched a thin crowbar, the kind you'd use to pry something open. She hadn't seen me yet. She crept inside, shutting the door as quietly as she could, then moved straight toward the counter where I'd been sitting seconds before. She rifled through the newspaper, then the drawer beneath it. Her movements were fast, desperate. She was looking for the notebook. I stepped out of the shadows. Lose something. She spun, nearly dropping the crowbar. Her face drained of color, her breath caught like she'd swallowed glass. What are you doing here? I live here, I said calmly, folding my arms. The better question is, what are you doing breaking into your own kitchen in the middle of the night? Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked from me to the folded newspaper, realizing too late that I had seen exactly what she wanted. You're making a mistake, she said finally, her voice trembling but laced with fury. You don't know what you're playing with. Then explain it to me, I shot back, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and Mom have been hiding something for a very long time. For a second, I thought she might attack me, but instead, she slammed the crowbar onto the counter and leaned forward, her eyes burning into mine. You think Dad was some hero? You think that notebook proves anything? He was weak. He couldn't handle what this family needed. My stomach twisted. Needed? Or what you wanted? She didn't answer, just gave me a tight smile that made my blood run cold. Before I could push further, another sound broke the tension, a slow clap from the doorway. My mother stood there, framed in the whole light, her face unreadable. Well, she said, her voice calm and smooth, I suppose the time for pretending is over. The room went silent. The rain outside beat harder, the windows rattling as if the house itself could feel the storm building within. I had expected denial, maybe anger, but not this. Not the quiet, steady acceptance in her voice. You've been watching us, my mother continued, stepping forward, listening, snooping, finding things you were never meant to find. She paused, her eyes flicking toward the folded newspaper. And now you think you hold the power. I forced my chin up. I don't think it. I know it. Her smile was soft, but it didn't reach her eyes. That's what makes you dangerous. Not because you have the truth, but because you believe it will save you. Something in her tone made my skin crawl. The certainty, the way she said it as though the ending had already been written. I expected her to lunge, to try and take the notebook, but she didn't. Instead, she turned to my sister and said, Get some rest. I'll handle this. My sister hesitated, glaring at me with an expression that promised retribution, then stormed past, slamming her shoulder into mine as she went. The crowbar clanged against the counter before she snatched it up and disappeared into the hall. Now it was just my mother and me. She sat at the table, right where I had been moments ago, and folded her hands neatly. Sit. I didn't move. Sit, she repeated, her tone sharper now, commanding. For a moment, I considered defying her. But something told me this was a game of patience, not brute strength. Slowly, I slid into the chair opposite her. She studied me, her eyes searching my face as though weighing something. Finally, she spoke. You think that notebook changes anything, but you don't understand what it means. Those words, his words, they are not salvation. They are a curse, one he left you to carry. Her voice wavered slightly then, a crack I hadn't heard before. It wasn't weakness, it was something else. Regret? Fear? I couldn't tell. Then tell me, I pressed. What does it mean? Why hide it? Why act like I was never meant to know? She leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. Because once you know, there's no undoing it. And you'll realize why your father was never the man you thought he was. The words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. If you're so Satan, then why not let me read it for myself? Her lips curved into a bitter smile. Because you already have. And that's what terrifies me. We sat in silence, the storm raging louder outside. My heart pounded, my mind spinning with questions, but before I could speak again, she stood and left the room without another word. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, the notebook clutched to my chest, the storm outside finally giving way to a heavy silence. Every creak of the house set me on edge. Every shadow seemed to whisper of things I wasn't ready to face. But by morning, I understood something with startling clarity. They had expected me to crumble, to retreat. What they never expected was that I wouldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. So I didn't. I began moving in ways they couldn't predict. Copying pages of the notebook and stashing them in safe places. Sending anonymous envelopes to a lawyer I found online. One my mother and sister would never suspect. I spoke carefully at home. But every word I said was calculated, designed to make them wonder how much I truly knew. And it worked. They grew restless, snapping at each other, whispering more agently behind closed doors. My sister stopped storming in with her usual arrogance. She began watching me instead, studying me with suspicion. My mother, always so composed, started making mistakes, burning dinner, leaving her phone unlocked. The cracks were widening, and I was the one prying them open. Still, nothing prepared me for the night I found the second letter, hidden not in the study, but inside the lining of my father's old jacket, tucked away in a forgotten trunk in the attic. This time, it wasn't unfinished. It was complete, signed, dated, addressed to me, and what it revealed was something none of them could have ever expected.